What makes a woman plot the death of her wealthy husband when she's living a life of luxury? This true crime story is about betrayal, manipulation, and a love affair that led to a murder. It's the chilling tale of Celeste Beard, a millionaire wife, and her affair with Tracy Tarleton, a young nurse, which would end in a deadly decision that no one saw coming. This is the story of Stephen Beard, a successful businessman and retired broadcasting executive who was shot and killed in 1999 in his luxurious Austin, Texas home. His wife, Celeste Beard, and her lover, Tracy Tarleton, were at the heart of this tragic crime, a plot that would change the course of their lives and cost Stephen Beard his. Celeste Beard was no stranger to hardship. Born in California, she had a rough upbringing and struggled with personal issues, including a turbulent family life. When she met Stephen Beard, a wealthy, retired media executive, she was drawn to his charm and success. Their marriage, however, was not as perfect as it appeared. While Stephen was known for his generosity and kindness, Celeste's deep dissatisfaction with her life and marriage began to grow. She longed for more control, more luxury, and a life without the constraints of her marriage. Over time, her secretive behavior, including financial manipulations, created tension between them. Stephen Beard, a former Fox broadcasting executive, enjoyed a comfortable, high-profile life after his retirement. A man with a reputation for kindness and generosity, Stephen had everything, except a perfect marriage. His wealth, his large home in Austin, and his social connections made him a prominent figure in the community. However, he failed to see the cracks in his marriage or his wife's growing unhappiness. His trust in Celeste and his desire to please her blinded him to the reality of their relationship. Tracy Tarleton was a young nurse working at a mental health facility in Austin. She was fresh out of nursing school when she met Celeste, and their friendship quickly grew deeper, eventually blossoming into an affair. Tracy, inexperienced and seeking affection, became entangled in Celeste's world. The older woman used her influence over Tracy, convincing her that their relationship was more than just love. It was a way out for both of them. The younger woman, vulnerable and impressionable, found herself swept up in a dangerous plan. The Beards lived in a grand mansion in Austin, Texas, a place that reflected Stephen's wealth and success. It was a beautiful home, filled with luxury and comfort, a sharp contrast to the dark secrets hidden within its walls. Despite the outward appearances of a perfect life, the reality was much different. Behind the grandeur of the mansion, a toxic affair was brewing, one that would eventually lead to murder. Stephen Beard, unaware of the growing tension and manipulation around him, continued with his life, never suspecting that the people closest to him were plotting his demise. Celeste Beard was dissatisfied with her marriage to Stephen. Despite his wealth, she felt trapped and unfulfilled. She wanted a life of luxury, but without the confines of her marriage. Her emotional and financial manipulations escalated as she sought a way out. Tracy Tarleton entered Celeste's life at a time when she was looking for affection and an escape. Tracy, naive and impressionable, was drawn to Celeste's charm and the promise of a better life. But as their affair deepened, it became clear that Celeste's motivations weren't just driven by love. They were fueled by the desire for a life of wealth and control. Together, Celeste and Tracy hatched a plan to secure Celeste's future, a plan that involved Stephen's death. For Celeste, it wasn't just about passion or infidelity. It was about taking control of her life and securing a life of wealth and freedom. And for Tracy, it was an opportunity to escape the pressures of her own life and step into the world Celeste promised her. Their motivations, intertwined with deception and greed, would soon set the stage for a devastating crime. It started innocently enough. Tracy Tarleton, a nurse at a local hospital in Austin, met Celeste Beard during a routine visit. At first, their interactions were casual, a simple professional connection between two women. But as time went on, their bond grew stronger. Celeste, charismatic and persuasive, drew Tracy in, making her feel special and wanted. What began as a friendly relationship soon deepened into something much darker. Celeste's intentions, however, were not just driven by affection. She had a plan, one that would lead to betrayal and ultimately murder. Celeste Beard didn't just have an affair with Tracy. She manipulated her into becoming part of a deadly scheme. As their relationship intensified, Celeste began to paint a picture of her marriage to Stephen Beard as a suffocating, miserable existence. She convinced Tracy that Stephen, a wealthy and successful man, was the obstacle standing in the way of their happiness. Celeste portrayed herself as a victim of a cruel, oppressive marriage, and it didn't take long for Tracy to be pulled into her web of lies. Celeste's manipulation was calculated. She convinced Tracy that the only way they could truly be happy together, free from Stephen's control and with access to his wealth, was for Stephen to be removed from the equation. The plan was simple but devastating. Kill Stephen and then claim his fortune. Celeste made sure to sell the idea to Tracy, not just as a way out of her own personal dissatisfaction, but as a way to give Tracy a better life too. The groundwork for the crime was laid carefully and methodically. Celeste, fully aware of Stephen's predictable schedule and the ins and outs of their home, gave Tracy specific instructions on how to gain access to their property. She told Tracy exactly when and where to strike, even coaching her on how to sneak into the house unnoticed. Celeste made sure Tracy had the means to carry out the murder, laying out the plan with chilling precision. Celeste believed that with Stephen out of the picture, she and Tracy could live the life they dreamed of, free from financial worries and without the constraints of Celeste's unhappy marriage. She thought that together, they could claim Stephen's fortune and start anew. However, what seemed like a foolproof plan would soon unravel in ways neither of them anticipated. On the night of October 2nd, 1999, Celeste Beard and Tracy Tarleton's plot finally came to fruition. After months of planning, manipulation, and deceit, the moment they had been preparing for arrived. Tracy, following Celeste's meticulous instructions, slipped into the Beard's mansion in the quiet of the night. She knew exactly what she was supposed to do. Stephen Beard, the wealthy retired media executive, was asleep in his bed, unaware that his life was about to end. Tracy, armed with a gun, crept into the bedroom where Stephen lay. The murder was swift and cold. Tracy fired multiple shots, the bullets striking Stephen while he remained unaware of the danger approaching him. The attack was calculated. There was no struggle, no last-minute attempt to escape or defend himself. Stephen, lying vulnerable in his own bed, had no chance to survive. The gunshots rang out, echoing through the mansion, but Stephen would not wake up from this final sleep. It was a methodical act, planned down to the smallest detail. The violence was not born of rage or a momentary loss of control. This was the execution of a carefully crafted plan to secure Celeste and Tracy's future, and it was carried out with chilling precision. As Stephen lay dying, the coldness of Celeste's reaction was apparent. She wasn't shocked, upset, or even fearful. She was calm, almost eerily detached. The plan had been set in motion, and to her it seemed as though the hardest part was over. Stephen was gone, and soon the fortune they had hoped for would be theirs. But Celeste knew that the next step was just as crucial. How would they cover up the crime? Celeste's demeanor during the aftermath of the murder was one of almost casual indifference. She did not panic or show distress. Instead, she calmly began to act as if nothing unusual had happened. She called the police to report a break-in, claiming that an intruder had attacked Stephen during the night. The scene was staged to appear as though a robbery had gone wrong, with Celeste playing the role of a concerned wife, distraught over the loss of her husband. But as the police began their investigation, the inconsistencies in Celeste's story started to surface. Her calmness, her lack of visible grief, and the strange details surrounding the crime raised suspicions. It was clear that the story she was telling didn't quite add up. But at that moment, Celeste and Tracy thought they had covered their tracks well enough to avoid suspicion. The true horror of what had happened would take time to unravel, but the pieces of the puzzle were already beginning to fall into place. The police responded quickly to the emergency call that night, arriving at the Beard's mansion to find Stephen Beard fatally wounded. However, upon arrival, the scene seemed to offer no clear explanation for the attack. The mansion appeared undisturbed, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. Everything looked too normal. The house was large, the rooms well kept, and there were no obvious signs of a robbery or theft. In cases like this, where there was no apparent motive, investigators typically begin to suspect that the crime could have been personal or carefully staged to look like something else. Detectives combed through the house, speaking with Celeste and processing evidence. Celeste claimed that an unknown intruder had broken into the house during the night, shot her husband, and fled the scene. The story she gave seemed reasonable at first. After all, the mansion was secluded, and it wasn't uncommon for home burglaries to occur in affluent neighborhoods. However, there was a nagging sense among the investigators that things didn't add up. The police could find no forced entry into the house, and the scene didn't resemble the aftermath of a random robbery. The victim, Stephen, had been shot while he slept. That kind of attack wasn't typical of a break-in. The police continued to probe, examining Celeste's demeanor and looking into her past. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A witness who had heard rumors of a relationship between Celeste and someone close to her came forward. This witness gave the police the crucial tip that changed the direction of the investigation. Celeste had been having an affair. The affair was not just a passing fling, but had been ongoing for months with Tracy Tarleton, a young nurse. As investigators looked deeper into this relationship, the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. The idea of a robbery gone wrong seemed less likely, and the possibility of a planned murder born out of betrayal, greed, and manipulation took shape. There were now new questions to consider. Was Celeste involved in her husband's death? Did Tracy, the young woman at the center of the affair, play a more significant role than originally thought? As more evidence came to light, suspicion began to mount. Investigators began looking into the financial situation of the Beards. Celeste, who had been married to Stephen for years, had access to his assets, but her spending habits and lifestyle choices didn't quite match up with the reality of her marriage. She had been living an extravagant life, one that seemed to be out of reach considering the couple's financial situation. It became clear that Celeste's dissatisfaction with her life wasn't just about personal unhappiness. It was also about money and the luxury she believed she deserved. The more investigators uncovered about the relationship between Celeste and Tracy, the more it seemed that the murder wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was planned. Celeste had been manipulating Tracy, convincing her that Stephen was standing in the way of their happiness. Celeste's actions, including her calm demeanor immediately following the murder, were adding to the growing suspicion. Her story of a random break-in started to unravel. The police focused on the details of the affair and the timeline leading up to the murder. They interviewed people who knew both Celeste and Tracy, and these conversations painted a troubling picture of a relationship fueled by deceit and betrayal. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered that Tracy had been involved in more than just the affair. The motive wasn't just passion, it was a shared goal: to eliminate Stephen and claim the wealth and lifestyle that Celeste had been craving. Tracy's involvement was more than that of a lover. It seemed she had been pulled into a plot that went beyond a simple affair. The pressure on Tracy began to build. Investigators, now certain that something more sinister had occurred, brought her in for questioning. They had evidence that tied her to the crime and to Celeste's manipulation. Tracy, at first, denied her involvement in the murder. However, after hours of questioning, the truth began to surface. Under intense pressure, Tracy finally broke. She confessed to the murder of Stephen Beard. She admitted that she had carried out the shooting just as Celeste had instructed. Tracy revealed the full extent of the plan: how Celeste had manipulated her into believing that Stephen was a barrier to their future together, that his death would set them free. Tracy spoke of how she had been led to believe that once Stephen was out of the picture, Celeste would reward her with the life they both desired. Tracy described how she had been used as a pawn in Celeste's scheme. With Tracy's confession, the full scope of the crime was finally revealed. Celeste, the mastermind behind the murder, had carefully orchestrated everything. She had planned the murder, recruited Tracy, and manipulated her into carrying it out. The evidence was now overwhelming, and the investigation was no longer about trying to figure out who committed the murder. It was about understanding the full extent of the betrayal and the greed that had led to it. The case, which had once appeared to be an isolated crime of passion, was now a carefully planned and executed murder, born out of a web of lies, manipulation, and a desire for wealth. As the police pieced together the remaining details of the case, the darkest suspicions were confirmed. The tragic death of Stephen Beard was not the result of a random act of violence, but the outcome of a dangerous plot set in motion by the very people who should have been closest to him. The trial of Celeste Beard and Tracy Tarleton began in 2002, and it quickly became one of the most publicized legal proceedings in Texas at the time. Both women had been arrested and charged with the murder of Stephen Beard, and the courtrooms were filled with observers eager to hear the details of the crime. Celeste, who had once presented herself as a grieving widow, now found herself on the other side of the law. During the trial, she attempted to maintain a composed, almost stoic demeanor, but the carefully controlled emotions she displayed only seemed to confirm the suspicions of those who believed she had orchestrated her husband's death for financial gain. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution painted a damning picture of Celeste's actions. They presented evidence of her manipulation of Tracy, showing how Celeste had not only had an affair, but had also used that relationship to manipulate the young nurse into carrying out the murder. They argued that Celeste had been motivated by greed and a desire to live a life of luxury, a life that Stephen's death would allow her to live. Celeste's defense, however, focused on portraying her as a woman who had been abused and mistreated by her husband. They attempted to frame her as a victim of a cruel marriage, suggesting that she had been driven to desperation and violence as a result of Stephen's behavior. The defense tried to shift the focus away from the calculated nature of the murder and instead emphasize Celeste's emotional turmoil. Yet, despite these arguments, it became clear to the jury that Celeste's role in the crime was far more than that of a victim. The details presented during the trial revealed a woman who had masterminded the murder for her own gain. Tracy, who had initially tried to distance herself from the crime, also faced her day in court. Unlike Celeste, who continued to deny her direct involvement, Tracy eventually pled guilty to her role in the murder. She admitted to carrying out the shooting, but claimed that she had been manipulated by Celeste, who had convinced her that killing Stephen was the only way for the two of them to be together. Tracy's defense attempted to present her as an impressionable young woman who had been drawn into Celeste's manipulative web, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Tracy had carried out the murder under Celeste's instructions, and the jury had no doubt that she played a significant role in Stephen's death. Throughout the trial, the prosecution emphasized the cold, calculated nature of the crime. The evidence showed that the murder had been planned over months, with Celeste actively involving Tracy in the logistics and details of the killing. The murder wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated act of violence, driven by greed and a desire for a life of wealth and comfort. In the end, the jury convicted Celeste of murder. In 2002, she was sentenced to life in prison for her role in the death of Stephen Beard. The conviction was a clear message that her calculated manipulation and greed had led to the death of her husband, and the justice system had determined that she would be held accountable for her actions. Celeste's life, once filled with wealth and luxury, was now confined to a prison cell, serving a sentence that would last for the rest of her life. Tracy Tarleton, meanwhile, pled guilty to the crime. While she cooperated with authorities and admitted her role in the murder, the court still held her accountable for her actions. In the end, Tracy was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her role in Stephen Beard's death. Though she had acted under the influence of Celeste, the court determined that Tracy was not completely innocent in the matter and that her actions contributed to the tragic loss of life. The verdicts were met with mixed reactions. Some believed that Celeste's sentence was too harsh, arguing that her personal struggles and difficult marriage had played a role in her decisions. Others felt that the justice system had sent a clear message about the consequences of greed and manipulation. For Tracy, the 20-year sentence was seen by some as a lesser punishment due to her guilty plea and cooperation with the authorities. Nonetheless, both women faced years of imprisonment as a result of their roles in the murder. The trial and its outcome marked the end of a long journey of investigation and legal proceedings. Stephen Beard's family and friends were left to grapple with the aftermath of his death and the betrayal that had been at the heart of the crime. His widow, once seen as a grieving wife, was now a convicted murderer, and the woman she had manipulated into committing the crime would also spend years behind bars. The case remains a haunting example of how greed and manipulation can lead to destruction, and it serves as a reminder of the deep consequences of betrayal and deceit. The murder of Stephen Beard stands as a tragic reminder of the devastating impact of manipulation and betrayal. A wealthy man who once enjoyed a successful career and a luxurious lifestyle was senselessly killed in his own home by those he trusted. His wife, Celeste, and her lover, Tracy, orchestrated a cold, calculated murder that not only took Stephen's life, but also destroyed their own futures. Their actions were driven by greed and a desire for wealth, but in the end, they both found themselves behind bars, their dreams shattered by their own choices. This case underscores how a single moment of betrayal can spiral into irreversible consequences. But it leaves us wondering, how far are people really willing to go to get what they want? For Celeste and Tracy, that answer was clear. They were willing to go all the way, even if it meant taking the life of an innocent man. Their greed, deceit, and manipulation led them to a fate of imprisonment. In the end, their pursuit of wealth and power was their undoing. What do you think about this crime? Was justice truly served? Did Celeste and Tracy get what they deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories.